Morning, everybody. Morning. I don't want to make this like a, student-teacher session here, but I wanted to make sure everybody was awake. I had my cup of coffee and everything, so I'm ready. And look, a few things I wanted to talk to you guys about in this session. I think it's a great initiative by Business World, and thanks to Dr. Anurag Batra for having me here, and thanks to you all for putting up with me for the next 15 minutes or so. The first thing I wanted to start off by saying is that, look, how many of you here think Rolls-Royce is in motor cars? One, at least somebody's honest. Two, three, four. Okay, not bad. So it's not really a relevant percentage, but I still have to say this. When you start thinking about what I'm going to say now, I think you have to see it from the perspective of a Rolls-Royce in aerospace and defense. And Rolls-Royce Motor Cars is owned by BMW. And so when you look at the auto segment, supply chain resilience and everything is very different than when you look at Rolls-Royce Aerospace and Defense. So we are in the aerospace and defense side. And we have three businesses: civil aerospace, defense, and power systems. So when you look at this supply chain, civil aerospace, the engines on the Air India 350s that are going to be taking you from India overseas with an Indian carrier are powered by Rolls-Royce. When you look at the Indigo, that's also followed on, so we're going to have these two large aircraft carriers, airlines, that will be powered by Rolls-Royce engines. Now when you look at defense, the C-130Js, when they transport our tanks, military personnel to the LAC or anywhere else up north, the C-130Js are for that purpose with Rolls-Royce engines. Combat aircraft, you have the Jaguars, which are able to perform today, the Hawk trainers for the training purposes. So in defense also we play a very significant role in the aerospace side. And now with the power systems business, we power the Coast Guard ships, we power the frigates, the destroyers, and we have the capability to even power the aircraft carriers. So I think when you look at the world that we operate in, it's very different. There's short cycle business, there's a long cycle business. So when you take a long cycle business, the supply chain needs are very, very different. When you take the short cycle business, the supply chain needs are very, very different. That's why it is very important I set the context here with you all as to what I'm going to say here. Now, the world I come from, and the world that Rolls-Royce lives in, is a world where the sustainability is extremely important. The quality is extremely important. The capability is extremely important. And I think that's why the theme of this event of saying championing resiliency in the supply chain world through human and tech is very, very important. Now, when we look at it, human processes are only about 4 sigma anywhere in the world. So if each and every one of us kept doing the same task 10,000 times, we'll still be able to perform it only at the 4 sigma quality levels. So if you really want to be in a place where you want 6 sigma quality levels, and the aerospace side of things wants 7 sigma quality levels, there is the involvement of technology. And the involvement of technology in the sector has been going from basic human beings doing every single act to robotics coming in and automation coming in and building out the factory floor so the 4 sigma keeps going up. And what did we do this for? Quality. Let's not forget that, right? What do we do this for? Repeatability. Let's not forget that. Now, when you look at today's world, you've got plethora of data. There's so much of data, people don't know what to do with the data. So that's a new world that has come about. The very first time I heard about artificial intelligence was 35, 40 years back. When I was doing my engineering, I did a programming course in Lisp. That was artificial intelligence language for programming. And at that day, they said artificial intelligence is here. This was 40 years back. And today, I live in a world where they say artificial intelligence is here, right? So, a generation later. But that's okay. The reason why artificial intelligence has come to the fore today is because of the storage capabilities, is because of the computing capabilities. We have taken sand and made it perform acts that are equivalent to our brains. So does that make sand equal to our brains is a question you want to ask about later, right? Because silica that is made in order to make all the transistors, in order to make all your PCBs, your circuit boards, everything, the one that powers NVIDIA stock price today is sand, right? That's where it all comes from. But when you look at that world, how the human beings have transformed it as they went along, human and tech will always have to coexist. There is no world that's going to be separated out from that. But in that world of human and tech, what is our role in this whole thing? And when we look at the what is our role in this whole thing? It becomes very, very clear. We have to be in a position where technology is leveraged. We have to be in a position where we have to step ahead of that. We have to be in a position where natural intelligence is much more than artificial intelligence. And so we have to understand these contexts, because all of us go to these seminars and we sit in these seminars and we don't go back and think about all these things. We have to think about, why is this relevant to my organization? What is so important? That's all I wanted to say about the human and tech piece of things. Now when I look at India, now jump a little bit further, and I say, where is India in this whole picture? 20 years back, in India, Excel spreadsheets ruled. Everything was done through Excel, expense reports, Excel spreadsheets. Planning, Excel spreadsheets. If at all, Excel spreadsheets or sheets of paper. That still continues today. But today is a world where everything is now completely into the digital space. And here we are, the knowledge partner for this event with E&Y. I think they have come out with a platform. And it was interesting for me to hear about it outside. That platform has the ability to not only give you analysis, has the ability to help you with your thinking process into the future, which is very good. Now, we have come into those spaces. We have people who compete from India in terms of capability development. And these capability developments are done for what? Let's take the supply chain event today and talk about capability developments in the supply chain world. And what is that going to mean? It means you have the resilience for factories to be able to operate without interruptions. If you do not have interruptions in a factory and are able to operate it, that means that your bottom line should be better. You can focus on how to improve the bottom line. Now, the next thing it brings about is the ability for us to keep our businesses sustainable. I should have predictability in my business in order to make it sustainable. And in supply chain, if I'm going to be a supplier to somebody, I need to have the ability to predict what's going to happen to the supply that I'm going to make to a client. And the client should be able to predict what they're going to get from me and be able to live with it. And that is the say-do ratio that has to be maintained between the supplier and the customer. And to maintain that, I think digital plays a very, very important role. And the transparency that it brings to the table and the ability for people to interface in a fraction of a second is what makes it that much valuable. This is where the human-tech collaboration happens. Now, the next step of this whole process I find is, when we do supply chain, when I talk about aerospace and defense, I think it's going to be about repeatability. And I find this as a simple example. What I find today, the largest challenge in our simplest day-to-day activities. I would suggest all of you do this experiment. Go to your tailor and ask him to make 10 shirts, right? And you come back after you check the 10 shirts, how many of them are exactly to the same dimensions? I guarantee you, and this is personal experience recently, which I was not very happy about, okay? So I basically said, I found almost 50% of them were different in sizes. And yes, we are great because we immediately go back to the tailor, argue with him, and he basically adjusts it for you, right? But the point is not that. In aerospace, there's nobody who's going to come down, and say that, okay, let's alter this part size, the dimensions are wrong. You make a mistake, you're costing lives. So that is very important in the supply chain space. Repeatability. Whether it's tailoring or it's aerospace components, we, who are people of the supply chain world, have to understand it is about repeatability. They phrase it under quality, but to me, it is a simple thing of, I'm going to make a part 1 millimeter, I'm going to make it 50 times over, and it'll all be 1 millimeter. And now we're talking in the aerospace world of microns. And you got to be able to make it in microns 100,000 times. So please understand that supply chain, in spite of all the human and tech and everything, is going to need the ability to have a say-do ratio that's extremely high, to be able to meet the tolerances, to be able to deliver to the commitments that were made. So, where does India fall in this picture? Our challenge has always been in India the repeatability factor. And now we see a lot of cognizance in this area. And so now that we are seeing more cognizance, there's more acceptance. Now that there's more acceptance, there should be more growth. But all this growth, etc., will come because we are chasing some model that's already been set. The model that has been set is that I can get into your supply chain, I'll make a part for you, and I'm going to be making my money. Great. For an SME, MSME, sure. But as you move from the MSME world, as you want to grow and build your businesses, as you want to become the China model, for lack of a better term, because they do 4 trillion of manufacturing for the world, and I think that's a great model to adopt. And I think our economy today is at 4 trillion and China's manufacturing is at 4 trillion. Right, so I think that's the target that we can go to. And if you're going to go there, then I think it becomes extremely important that we control the supply chains in 3 different forms. The first form is what I talked about, which is your repeatability, your sustainability and your repeatability. And I think if you do that, then the trust builds and you're able to deliver to your client. The second model that needs to happen is that we have the technologies. And if we have the technologies, then we create our supply chain. When you look at the automotive sector, look at all the cars that are being made there. All the cars that are being made today, all these cars have the ability to be made in India with all the supply chain being in India. And with all the other technologies, as we grow further, we need to bring them more and more into India. Today, we have the basic products that constitute the final product still made overseas. So even for our domestic market, we had to get more and more local, which builds more and more supply chain. So the third most important thing is, if we are going to be in the exports world, it's a combination of our ability to show experience, of our ability to have the capability, we have the capacity. So I think these are some of the key themes that you should be watching out for. And every time that we try to do a supply chain here in India, these are the themes that fall in place. And I think at the end of the day, the basics of business has not changed. The way you do business has changed, but the basics are about profitability and about commitments. Promises made, promises kept. Okay? So I want to leave you with these 3 C's of mine. The first one is a commitment. India is committed today to say that we are going to become the manufacturing hub for the world. And India is committed to it. We are going to become the 3rd largest economy with 5 trillion. And I think as we keep growing into this, we are going to find our space in the manufacturing world globally. Right? So, commitment is the key. We made a commitment. We're going to be here and we're going to do more and more manufacturing. Part of the manufacturing is supply chain. That's only one part. The bigger part is IP creation, it's about technology creation, it's about co-creation. We have the minds to build anything we want. We sent Chandrayaan 3 to the moon. If you can send Chandrayaan 3 to the moon, supply chain is a piece of cake. We just don't put the focus on it. So the commitment has to be there. More importantly, like I said before, more than the commitment, it is going to be extremely important on the consistency part of things. Repeatability, as I said before. Commitment is good to start. Consistency is what builds on it. Your supply chain, resilience is not going to happen without consistency. And your consistency is not going to happen without the focus. And last but not the least is collaboration. There are spaces where we got to reinvent the wheel. There are spaces where we don't have to reinvent the wheel. It's going to be a combination of the reinventing the wheel approach and of innovating the wheel approach. And I believe those 2 areas are going to be very key for India as we go forward. There are various ways of doing the collaboration, partnerships, technology transfers, pure sales, many different things. And the world is getting very, very different day by day. And the whole thing has to happen where with the commitment that we have, with the consistency that we provide, and the collaborative spirit that we have, we will have the resilience to build our manufacturing sector, which automatically means supply chain. So I think I've held your attention for enough. I'm going to stop there. If you go back and take away the 3 C's and you think I made any sense, apply it. And I think we really believe in it in Rolls-Royce, and we really try to find ways through that. So without much further ado, I'll stop here, and I'll hand it back to my colleague. I am happy to do any questions, if you have any. Yeah.
Mic, please. Mic.
Thanks a lot. Oops. It's too loud. Yeah, this is okay. Thanks a lot. I think it was quite interesting session. And when you asked about the Rolls-Royce, the first thing that came in the mind was car, and I actually forgot. Yes,
Hey,
I see all the engines, right?
We're still trying to eliminate it from the minds, even though people don't come out and stand up and say, I thought cars.
And I was actually looking at the people who can afford Rolls-Royce. So, anyways, so great session. So, my question is around, the human and the tech that we're talking about today. And that's my observation. People are talking about AI. People are talking about, the technology. But as one grows in the career, they start losing, touch on the ground, and they're not focused on what's happening in the technology. It's only about leadership, right? And that's where I see the conflict comes. So what's your advice on that? How can a growing leader keep himself or herself focused and on grounded with what's happening in today's world on the technology side?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough question in the sense that there are easier Gyan answers I can give you. But I think if I were to really tell you, my thoughts on this is, look, I'm basically an engineer. So technology and the adoption of technologies and the importance of technologies come naturally to me. Right? But not a lot of people are from that world, and a lot of people are from different worlds of finance, of policy, international relations, very different worlds that leadership can happen in. And I think when I look at that, we all touch technology. Without us knowing it, every day on the phone we are doing every new app that is available, whether it's playing games on the flight or it's a banking app that we do at a moment's notice. So I think the technology piece of it is with us. But I think as leaders, there's a job given to us, and the job is to grow companies profitably. Even a non-profit is actually profitable, right? So it's like nobody is going to take that away from the human beings forever. You want a business, you want to grow. And growth is profitability. Profitability means just money. So how you do it is left up to them. If you're going to have 1,000 painters, right? What is the technology that is required for these painters to do their paintings much quicker? The technology could be in the paint products, could be in the paper products or canvas products. The thinking has to be in the leader's form of, what do I have to do to empower the people in my organization in order to deliver to the growth of the company? And as long as that is there, I honestly believe that technology will emerge. Because if the thinking is one of saying that I just have to be a boss, and I want them to stand up when I walk in, that's a very different leadership, right? But if you say that, I want to be a business leader that's going to grow this company, you think differently. That's my 2 cents.
Good morning, sir.
Morning.
Excellent session, sir. You spoke about 3 C's, basically 4 C's, basically.
I can pip you and say 5 C's, but okay.
Okay. So that was what actually was mentioned. So yes, it is about manufacturing, it is about technology creation, consistency and collaboration. With my limited experience, I can really correlate with the last 3 basically. What about manufacturing? How do you see that, where is Indian manufacturing, make in India heading to? I mean, because from my experience with whatever I can see that manufacturing sector as it was envisaged, so probably it is not growing to that extent. Other things are happening, collaboration is happening, technology transfers, consistency of course is a great concept. So where do you think is the scope for manufacturing increase in India?
It's a very good question. Thank you for that. Look, I think manufacturing is a understated thing in India. Of course, when I first looked at Make in India in 2014, and they were saying that manufacturing is at about 16, 17%. And so really we need to take it to 25%. That was the goal of the first tenure of our current government. And they did a lot of good initiatives in that direction, right? And then what happened is that the percentage keeps varying. Today, based on the data, you're still anywhere between 16% plus or minus whatever the data is. But why is it only 16%? We're measuring something which is 16% of a 4 trillion economy, and then you're looking at a 16% of a 1 trillion economy. So I think in some ways it is kind of unfair, right? But I look on the ground and I say that what are we doing in manufacturing? You look at tier 2 cities like Coimbatore, right? I mean, tier 2, before it used to be Bangalore, Ahmedabad, Hyderabad. I mean, I have a feeling that those are now tier 1, right? But now you go to tier 2, really, it becomes your Coimbatores, your Trichis, your Aurangabads. So those areas are all constantly, we have upped the game, in my view, right? And when we up the game, it's always going to be a challenge explaining it, and I think we don't explain it well enough. Semiconductor manufacturing, batteries manufacturing. I think a lot of the manufacturing into the high technology areas are already moving into India. Classic case is Apple phones, right? iPhones was the first one to argue with India about saying we don't want to do it in India. Give me this benefit, give me that benefit. But in spite of everything, they're doing it in India. Some would argue and say that, well, there was a China factor there. But okay, regardless of the factors, it could have gone anywhere else in the world, but it was India that it came to. So India is doing something right in the eyes of the world. Now, India is doing something right in our own domestic market size, right? Today, and I think most of us in this room will agree with me, we would first say that, is this Indian made, Chinese made, Western Europe made? And our minds are in a way tuned to saying, I will buy based on where it is made also to a certain degree. That was never a question, right? Cost was a question, so you bought whatever was cheapest. Today, where is it made is a question that has never been there before. That's a good question. Because what that does to us is, allows our MSMEs, people to produce more, show the quality of the products made in India that will allow us to continue to grow the manufacturing sector. So we are creating a consciousness into our own client base in order to develop the qualities, which is a very good thing. But most importantly, you want to break the mold, really. If you want to break the mold, we have to get into the co-creation model. You need to have IP in India. So for example, when HAL manufactured the LCA aircraft, we are talking about exporting the LCA aircraft to countries that want to buy it. Right? When the Chinese built their J-50s, immediately they went and gave it for free. Or maybe they made them pay, whichever way it is, right? But the point is, when you have your IP, you start exports. The government of India today talks a lot about exports, but you can only export what is yours. When you have to export what is somebody else's, you got to get permissions. You got to live by the rules. So I think it is extremely important for India in all sectors, and I know in defense, there is constant tug-of war between buying stuff to make in India stuff to co-creation in India. There's a huge tug-of-war that happens now. And it's all happening to the benefit of India. Whether it is technology transfer, it's one phase of it. But Make in India is no longer contract manufacturing. Make in India is no longer where technology is not imparted to companies in India. Make in India is about creation of jobs. It is no longer just a fancy term. If you were to procure from defense, minimum is 50-60% local, maybe more. But my point is, it can be 100% local. And that's where co-creation comes in. That's where IP generation comes in. So I'll be honest with you, I think 16% continuing at the trend at which our GDP is growing is not a bad story. It's not a sufficient story. Because a sufficient story is, it has to accelerate ahead of the GDP so that there's enough jobs that are created in these sectors. And that is the question, how to do it. And to answer that question, it falls into the confidence building, which is your reliability and deliverability and everything. It is also the IP generation, which gives you control. And the third most important thing is the relationships. With the geopolitics around the world, it's going to become more and more relevant how your relationships are built with all the people who will buy from you. Whether it be Nigeria, where our Prime Minister got honored recently, or it be the United States of America. It's going to be about the relationships. And that's where the collaboration piece comes in. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Yes, sir. I think behind you, the mic.
Sir, my question to you is, many expert and consultant in these days of SCM and logistics, they are claiming that they can reduce this logistic cost by 30%. And there is a lot of confusion in the chambers of commerce, in the vendors, whether it is possible. What is your view? Is it possible for the vendor to reduce 30% cost, whatever they claim?
Well, a blanket reduction of promise is probably a good sales pitch, but the reality is how inefficient the operations are. I wouldn't say that 30% is a good number. I'd say even 70% is a good number if your operations are really bad, right? So the bottom line is it going to reduce? Is it going to be optimized? Is there productivity to be had? Answer is yes, right? And the question is, where does it come from? When we analyzed our factories, both our joint ventures that we have here, and when we looked at it, we annually look at productivity targets. We annually look at Kaizen projects. We annually look at suppliers' costs. We annually look at productivity on the machining processes. Can we do this better? It's not just a question of logistics. Logistics also, the question is, what is causing the costs? Is it just inflation that's causing it? Or is it truly a cost that is because of the fuel cost? Is it truly a cost because of the demand and supply costs? We have to look at it much more deeper than that. So when we go in there and when I have to make a business presentation for expansion of our factories, etc., it is all factored in. And we have to come and say that, look, you're going to see a productivity benefit against your current supplier to this new supplier, this amount. It's a lot easier when you're switching suppliers from the Western world to India. It's a lot harder when you're switching Indian supplier to Indian supplier, right? So it's all, there's so many things, but anybody who says blanket, I'll get 30%, in my experience at least, it's just a statement. But it can be 70%, don't get me wrong, and it can be nothing. But it's a good starting point for somebody, the consultants, to come in and give a very thorough evaluation for the business leader to evaluate and say what's the best option. It's a good starting point. Fine.
We take it offline?
Okay.
The teams.
Okay. Thank you very much for listening to me.